Good morning. Welcome to Conversations with Carla. Today is June 1st, 2020. Good morning again. This is Carla Harris with the People Institute, and I want to welcome you to Conversations with Carla. So, as you know, many of our states here around the country are reopening. We're headed back to work, and I wanted to take a few minutes to just talk about going back to work from a couple of different aspects. And a couple of weeks ago, we talked to employment law attorney Don Slesnick. And this morning, we are going to the expert on human resources and what their role is as we move back into the workplace. So my guest today is Nicole Belyna. She is a 15-year veteran in the HR world. She is currently the Field Services Director for SHRM, which is a Society for Human Resource Management. She specializes in talent management and leadership, and she is also the former president of the Washington, D.C. chapter of SHRM. So as you know how we do it, we love to get your comments, we love to get your questions, and we really want you to join the conversation. So let's bring in our guest, Nicole Belyna.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, Nicole.
Good morning, Carla. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Welcome to Conversations with Carla. So it is time to go back to work. We are, 10 or 11 weeks in all around the country, and people are really still nervous. People are not sure what should be expected when they go to the workplace. I don't think as a business or business community, we're not back to normal, and I don't think we'll ever be back to normal. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So before we get started, give me a little bit about what SHRM is. So tell me what you do at SHRM or what the organization is.
Sure. So SHRM, or the Society for Human Resource Management, we really create better workplaces where employers and employees can thrive together. SHRM really is the voice of all things workers, and the workplace. We're the foremost expert and thought leader on issues impacting today's ever-evolving workplaces. We have over 300,000 HR and business executive members in 165 countries. And SHRM impacts the lives of more than 115 million workers and their families globally. So,
wow.
Simply put, Carla, our purpose is to elevate the HR profession. That truly is our North Star. Our mission is to empower people in workplaces by advancing HR practices and maximizing human potential.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, understanding that your role is so critical in making sure companies are in compliance with the wage and hour and employment laws. What are HR departments doing as our community, as our world goes back to work? And what do you believe the responsibility is on the part of HR professionals?
Sure. That's a great question, Carla. Simply put, they're doing a lot. This truly is a time when organizations are really leaning heavily on their HR departments and their HR professionals to take the lead as we navigate this unique time. But to be more specific, as organizations are returning back to work, or perhaps returning back to the office after working remotely for the last number of weeks, HR professionals are addressing a number of things like workplace safety, recalling employees back to work, addressing employee benefits and their compensation, remote work, should it continue in some cases? Those are just a few things I think that are at top of mind for HR professionals right now.
So, what do you think the biggest change is going to be as we move forward?
I think the biggest change is really going to be as you had mentioned earlier, we're not going to go back to normal, right? So there are a lot of things that we take for granted, pulling together these impromptu in-person meetings, things like that. We really are going to have to be very cautious as we move back into our physical workspaces, and really think about our actions as we go into work. I think that right now, companies' actions and communication is critical, as we make this transition.
Hmm. Hmm. And I know that just from our conversation and a little bit of your what I've seen in your bio, you've done a lot of work in the retail industry, in the hospitality industry, and those industries are so hard hit with your front the. I don't say essential workers, but your frontline workers, those workers who are really making the ship run, right? You know, your customer service folks, your sales associates. And, so two things come to mind. The first is when you think about folks in those roles in an industry that's so hard hit. I mean, retail came, at least brick and mortar retail,
Sure.
came to a grinding halt. Hospitality, I mean, I'm based here in Florida, and hotels are still only open to essential workers.
Sure.
So, if you had a crystal ball, talk to me about what you think that would look like over the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months.
Sure. Yeah, definitely just, tricky industries. And, I think that employers really need to be staying into communication with their employees now. So, if they had furloughed any employees over the last few weeks, you know, have those conversations, checking in with those employees, making sure they're okay. And, as they begin to open, communicating with those employees, letting them know, hey, we're planning on recalling you potentially in the next week, couple weeks, month from now. And here are the safety precautions that we're taking. Try to paint a picture of what their workplace might look like before they get there. To make sure that they, as much as possible, they feel safe coming back to work. In some cases, as you had pointed out, Carla, these hospitality hotels, retailers have taken big financial hits. And
Yeah.
so the staffing may not be aligned with the demand when these locations open up. There are a lot of people across the country who they're ready to head back to the department store. They want to go on vacation. But the brick and mortar locations of retailers and hotels and resorts may simply not be able to afford the staffing level right away. And
Yeah.
so, there's, also preparing those critical employees for that, and just knowing that, when they come back, they may be taking on additional roles.
Hmm.
There's a, which brings into question, how do we train employees as we bring them back? They may be doing multiple roles, something different that they hadn't before. And so, um, uh, those are some really, really important factors. But again, I
Yeah.
go back to, I can't stress enough how much the communication of empathy and just setting an expectation of safety is critical for employees right now.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to welcome our viewers. So Glenn is on. Marty, good morning, good morning, good morning, Angelique. So Glenn has a really great question. So his question is, where do you see virtual work for the former retail hospitality going? And do you see retraining those workers for call center or customer support, which you alluded to a little bit previously? So let's talk a little bit about the virtual work, because typically that's almost like an oxymoron, right? So how do you work virtually when you are providing customer service in that role? But tell me what you think about that.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question, Glenn. And, virtual work, obviously, that's not going to work for 100% of that working population. However, I think there are opportunities where, perhaps retail will, offer virtual shop, services, more virtual
Hmm.
services. So, more personalized styling online, before you actually get to the store, something like that.
Hmm.
Leveraging social media to promote their brand, things of that nature. And, again, I kind of go back to that, to that point of somebody who has been used to working with customers on a face-to-face basis may be leveraging their customer service skills to work with them more over the phone or online, as best as they possibly can.
So, so you talked a little bit about preparing their, companies preparing their employees before they come back to work. What does that look like, not just in hospitality or retail, but what does that look like overall? What responsibility or what actions should organizations be taking, one, even during this time of quarantine, but
Yeah,
as people move back, because scheduling is different, school is different. I mean, school for their children will look very different.
sure.
Can't Summer camps are closed. So what's your thought around that?
Sure. Yeah, great question. Again, I think if companies can communicate as early as possible and as clearly as possible what the expectation is, and their timelines. And I think you also brought up a good point of, as they're still working from home or perhaps preparing to go back to work, staying in communication. There's been the question of concern around mental health for employees who've been furloughed, or even if they are still working, bearing that burden of balancing a much different work-life balance, or work-life integration, if you will. And so, I think that being able to say to the employees, over, maybe it's having virtual town halls, weekly check-in meetings to say, to give them progress updates and give them as much information as possible. I think transparency really is the key here.
Hmm. So, um, you mentioned something about training.
Mhm.
So Glenn says that he's in the tech space, and many of their clients are saying that they want to move away from brick and mortar and more into the online and e-commerce space.
Sure.
So when you talk about cross training, how much of an investment should employers be making in training, either during this downtime, moving forward? What um, so two things. So let me back up for a second.
Sure.
So we know that unfortunately, training and development is usually one of the first things to go when there's a budget cut, right?
Sure. Yep.
I mean, we're trainers. That's what we do.
Mhm.
So what how important is maintaining the skill set for your team, making sure that they're doing something to keep themselves sharp, so when it's time to come back to work, they're ready.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think that business owners and organizations need to look at that from a business standpoint. As you had mentioned, Carla, it is very easy to, when you're going down the line, sort of slash that training and development budget. But if you really think long term, that is a truly valuable investment that shows an employee like you care about me, you care about my professional development and my growth, and B, it puts an organization in a much better position when looking forward, they're able to have a great set of employees who can not only do job A as they did when they entered 2020, but
Sure.
they can now also do job A, job B, job C, as needed. And so, I think you've got to look beyond just that immediate dollar number that you can kind of slash and look at when we reopen. How does that make us more agile and just more nimble to be able to react to the needs of our customer?
So let's talk about the employee for a second. So, folks are coming back. They're talking. It's all over the news that people who are working in the frontline jobs, they're really making more money on unemployment, especially with the pandemic assistance. And then, of course, we know that there are companies that will not be bringing people back, that will be shutting their doors or slashing their employee base significantly. So, as an HR professional, what should employees be doing as they prepare themselves for the next phase? What kinds of skills are HR departments or HR folks or companies looking for during this time of no work or layoff period?
Sure. Yeah, and that's a great question. I have had some people say, "Oh, this will be a great time to recruit. Recruiting is going to be much easier." If you've ever had to recruit in both good economic times and bad, you know that recruiting is never easy, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think that while yes, there are more people who will be looking for jobs. I think that companies really need to be thoughtful in, uh, you know, how they consider their talent. And so, going back to our training conversation, I think, it is wiser to invest in your current employees. You had mentioned that there are some employees who are furloughed and may decide that they don't want to come back. They're making more money on unemployment. And I would say, that's really going to come down to the engagement that you're providing those employees.
Mhm.
If you can train these people to have valuable skills and show their value even when they're not right in front of you, I think that will be invaluable. As the reality is that we will likely have to look externally to hire additional staff. And, I think you've got to, as with any other time, people who are resilient, people who, really thrive in times where we can be nimble and agile is really, really key. Those skill sets are always invaluable.
Excellent, excellent. Um, so I'm sorry, I completely lost my train of thought. So you talked about what the employers are looking for. What would you say the top transferable skills would be for an employee during this time? Because we know that unemployment will stop.
Sure.
Um, and if people are not financially responsible, it doesn't matter how much money you're getting if you can't manage the money appropriately.
Absolutely.
So if a person wants to improve themselves,
Mhm.
what would you think? Where do you think they would focus, and what would be the top, let's say top 2 to 3 transferable skills?
Sure. You know, that's eh, kind of a tricky question. I mean, I think it sort of varies by industry to some degree. You know, I think that, you know, being able to, um, there will be a number of customer service positions open. You know, I'm sure, you know, those great communication skills are always going to be very, very valuable. Um, you know, again, I think being technology savvy, whatever that may be for a particular industry, I think is crucial. And you know, showing the ability to be able to pick up different technologies can also be very important.
Mm-hmm.
As well. There's a variety of different, you know, I think that we will see a variety of new apps and things like that where, you know, for example, employees may return to work and they may have been used to punching in, you know, with a number. Now it may be something, you know, they may be using their smartphones more frequently. And so, you know, I think that technology adaptation is really important as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, absolutely. So Marty has a question, and she says, "What about training leadership to be flexible as they manage a new and/or different workforce?"
Great question. And, you know, I think that leadership being as prepared as possible is really what is going to be key in transitioning employees as they come return back to their physical office. They, you know, leadership really of organizations are really going to have to be empathetic, you know, be really wonderful listeners, and understand that things are not going to just go back to normal, as we've said, you know, time and time again. And so,
Mm-hmm,
you know, leader leaders from, you know, top down are going to um, have to recognize that they are going to, you know, as Marty pointed out, be flexible. Um, and so the more organizations can prepare those leaders for that, uh, the better.
yeah, absolutely. So well, let's see, we have another comment here. So Christy says, "Good morning, Christy." Christy says, "If employees are being trained to do extra work on roles, do you think companies should pay them for that? Higher wages, more time off, a bonus structure, something like that?"
Sure. Yeah, I think you know, that is going to kind of be a case by case basis to some extent, as far as you know, if someone's job description is completely overhauled, obviously, you know, you do have to analyze that compensation for sure. You know, I think realistically, you know, also something to take into consideration is, you know, have companies prepared to do that. And so I think that there's a difference between sort of expanding a role and preparing someone to kind of go to the next level, or versus, you know, have I completely changed this person's job description? And those are really two different things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, given what we as a nation have experienced this weekend, and we're in the process of still working through those things, what, what, or how, not quite sure whether it's a what they should do or how they should handle. Let's just talk about the diversity aspect of the workplace. How are companies, how should they be expected to um, handle what we're in the midst of right now today?
Sure. You know, I think companies need to listen to their employees, you know, listen to the chatter, and address it, be proactive in you know, addressing it, you know, so that there's not bottled up feelings, you know, there's not uh, anger or hostility, you know, kind of bubbling up in the background. You know, these are conversations, you know, that we need to talk about, and they're important. They affect us both in and outside of the workplace. And so, you know, I don't. It's we can't just kind of sweep it under the rug and pretend that it doesn't happen. But I think there is a way to address these topics and make sure that everybody is, again, comfortable, feels safe coming to work every day.
So this has really been great. If you have any other comments, please just put them in the chat and we'll make sure Nicole answers them. But Nicole, I always want to know what are your top three areas or top three tips that you would give. But before you do that, Glenn has another question.
Oh, okay.
Glenn says, as a grandparent watching his granddaughter trying to learn online from her teaching, I assume schools, is difficult. Where do we start with the whole retraining conversation to accommodate all of the changes that we are all experiencing? So I think too, so I want to add to that, generations. So we know that we're now in our workplace is comprised of 5 different generations.
Sure.
I'm not quite sure what that's going to look like going forward, obviously, but what should be taken into account when we're talking about people who bring value to the workplace, but who may not be as technologically savvy, who may not understand this whole virtual workspace or Zoom calls or things like that?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And, I'm glad that you brought up the 5 different generations, and it truly, and I've seen, students who are in college registering for classes, they're so, really sort of struggling with the fact that they're not going to be able to see, they may not be able to see their classmates next semester. I mean, that's the exciting part of going to college, right? And so, I think that, there are valuable skills to be learned. And the reality is that in the workplace, technology is a piece of that. And with that, I will say that not every job is for everybody. And so, there may be jobs that are more technologically involved than others. And so, or maybe there's an aspect of technology that, really resonates with you, but not with me. And so, just like any other job, I think we need to kind of figure out where our skill sets are best suited, and, and really hone in on that.
Good. So what are your top 3 things that you want to leave us with?
Sure. So, I think my top 3 things, number one, I've said this a few times over the course of the show, is, employers, organizations need to communicate. This is so critical, to stay in touch with your employees and, provide regular updates, to them, and just be transparent with your intentions as much as possible. We can't expect that things are going to get back to normal. It's really, just a kind of silly thought that is going to happen. And, I think for the better, I think there is some good that will come out of this, for sure. And, but that said, people move, people address change at different paces. And so, even though there are people that are eager to get back to work and see their coworkers, they may not have been out of the house except to go to the grocery store, over the last 11 weeks. And so that's something to consider. There's a lot of apprehension there. And, making sure that we've adapted the workplace to accommodate all of these, safety precautions, whether it's PPE or, hand sanitizing stations, cleaning schedules, things like that, all really, really important. And, I think the third thing is, plan ahead. If anything, I think, this pandemic has taught us that There are no guarantees.
That's right.
When
Yeah.
things are feeling really great, it may not always stay that way. And so there's no guarantee that these stay-at-home orders are behind us. There may be others ahead. And so, I think this is a great time to kind of reflect back on the last 11 weeks. And if you don't have a business continuity plan, get that in place. And or if you do, make those amendments as needed. Um,
Good. Well, thank you so much. And thank
thank
you
you.
so much for being here. So if you just give me a second, I'm going to wrap up and say goodbye for now.
Thank you, Carla.
Thank you. So I want to thank Nicole for being here. And I also want to address where we are today. And like many of you, I am sickened by the events that took place this weekend. We are a country at war, and we must create peace with one another. We must begin to intentionally see the value and perspective of other people. We must respect our differences, and we must recognize the similarities that exist between us. Likewise, we cannot stand by and watch the injustices that are inflicted on the Black community and communities of color overall. We must hold wrongdoers accountable and take a stand against what is wrong. I offer my condolences to the Floyd family and to all the other families who have suffered at the hands of police agencies. I pray for healing for this country and for a consciousness that allows us to see each other as human beings filled with love and faith and a right to live peacefully with one another. Let's open the lines of civil communication and let's begin to heal. We need it. Thank you so much for joining us today. Take care, and if you protest, protest peacefully. God bless you all.